G'day legends, James Greenshields here from Resilient Leaders Foundation. At the moment the streets can be an interesting place to be. 2020, the year of perfect vision. Well, it hasn't been completed yet, so don't think you're too clouded yet. But the point is that there's a lot of people acting in emotion out on the streets. They are acting generally out of fear, shame or guilt. And yes, anger will come up, but anger is a surface emotion. So the impetus or the causal issue below anger is generally fear, shame or guilt. And sadness thrown into the mix. But the point that I'm wanting to make is that it's not just what's happening on the streets, it's so much of what's happening for us in life. Have you ever been in a situation where someone has been the perpetrator of ill towards you? You know, they have inflicted you with pain or whatever. Now, some of you have survived incredible trauma. And if you've got through that stage, my hat's off to you that you're still here, because lots of people who experience trauma will end up choosing to take their own life. And I remember the position of almost doing that myself because of my own trauma. So what happens if we allow all this to build up? You don't need to experience huge trauma for a whole sequence of small events to build into something what turns out to be catastrophic. There's a key underlying journey in which, if we choose going down, can really liberate us, and it takes us to where we would call beyond resilience. Why beyond resilience? Because resilience infers an adversary. I need something, a fight, to hit me so that I can bounce back from it. I need a storm to weather so that I have the capability to weather a storm. And resilience, because of its very definition, requires an adversary. Not only that, it's talking about coming back to a place before the wound was even harboured, before it was inflicted, which actually says, by inference, the wound is nugatory and one, not necessary, and two, is bad by inference. And that doesn't allow us to go through the healing journey itself. The healing journey is completed when something external comes upon us through an internal process of forgiveness. Now, what does that mean? This is a big discussion I just had with an awesome guy from another country about what is forgiveness. And it is, the question to you is, what is forgiveness to you? You hear this thing bandied around so often. You know, we still, in a Western culture, come from a Judeo-Christian background. And often we'll hear this thing called forgiveness. Christ came to preach the word of forgiveness. Well, turn the other cheek, all this stuff. And when I was young, I heard this conflicting message of, I can forgive, yet I can't forget. And that, when I was young, that didn't make sense. I had cognitive dissonance because of that. But I didn't understand why until later. Well, if you're forgiven, why are you still holding on to it? Because every time you remember that thing, then you will feel the emotions experienced within inside. And this is where it comes to our understanding of memory now. Memory is created in this very moment. And it is done by two things particularly. The emotional residue is still held around the memory itself, because the memory is a 5-sensory thing: sight, sound, taste, touch and smell, linked to an emotion, positive, negative or neutral, within your subconscious mind. And your memory banks are just in here on your right hemisphere. But that's how it works. So if I have a negative emotion attached to the memory, and I keep bringing up that memory, then I keep feeling the negative emotion, which then keeps supplying negativity towards that memory. But I'm doing that not in the past, I'm doing that in the moment, this moment, the only moment. And not only that, in this moment, if I'm feeling negative about the world, what I will generally do is I will remember negative things. If I'm feeling positive about the world, what I will generally do in this moment is think of or remember positive things. You also know, by your own experience, that your memories in time have changed over time. So, in essence, your memory is created in this very moment, in the now. And you have, depending on your level of self-awareness and emotional literacy, a level of control over that memory. That includes traumatic memory. Being hit by a roadside bomb on the 23rd of April 2007 is part of the story if I. Now, the trauma that I chose to experience at a subconscious level can also be part of the story, or the fact that it no longer dictates who I am. And in fact, it never did. It was just a story that I told myself as opposed to the understanding of my essence. Then where do I come to? Well, I can let that one go, and I can realise that it was the fourth best day of my life. Categorically. I was talking to this guy yesterday, and he just looked at me with eyes open, and he realised I'm truthful in what I say, because I wouldn't be alive if that didn't happen. Go figure. So I reflect on other situations where forgiveness in my life has been necessary. I was, as a young lieutenant, my first posting in the military, I had my boss assault me in the mess in a drunken outburst in which I was just collateral damage. He came at me from behind in a late at night experience, etc. And then it was washed under the carpet. And I stayed under his command for over 18 months, and you could say, if you want, down that line, say, suffered workplace harassment, being threatened to be sacked at least, if not twice a week, each week, for 18 months. Now, I came away from that experience clinically depressed. However, I didn't get, no psychologist got their hands on me. Why? Because I didn't want help back then. I was trying to make my own way through life. But my last year of the military, many years later, after 17 years in the military, but I chose to go and sit in front of this person and thank him for the experiences that I had under his command. And in a minute 40 dialogue, and I knew it was a minute 40 because it took me 3 hours travel time between where I was to get to this place, this seat in front of him that day, and I practiced it ad nauseum. In a minute 40 dialogue, I said, I want to forgive myself, and I would like to forgive you for everything that went on in our time together. But what I do know is it's made me far more resilient. Now, I didn't know, he was a senior rank to me. I didn't know how he would respond to this situation. What he did respond with was anger. Very angry. And my forgiveness journey hadn't been completed until he went into his anger in front of me. And he launched a tirade at me. Now, it was in this tirade that I got my gift. I saw a 40-year-old child, a wounded child, who was in pain. And I was literally overcome by compassion for this individual. That moment was when I knew I could completely let the situation go, and forgiveness had occurred within my heart space. It wasn't about him. It was completely about me. Now, funny enough, when this washed over me, his anger just dissipated, completely dropped away. There was no challenge to his anger. There was only compassion. Sounds like a test under fire in the moment. Hello, Changi. So, this is so true. So true. Because it was a test. And I allowed myself to be in that situation. Now, in working with people about forgiveness, I often will tell them, do you need to go and talk to the person? And they'll say yes. And I'll actually ask them again, who's that about, you or them? Because so often we need to go and be heard to the person. We need to go and be heard. Well, that's about me, not about them. And that comes back to forgiveness. In the moment when I received the forgiveness inside, he completely changed. And then he showered me for 5 minutes in accolades about how he'd been following my career incognito and just had seen what person I'd become and wanted to have a beer with me, to which I've never caught up with him again because I don't need to. I've closed that loop. But the whole point was, as soon as I hit this seeing the wound within him, this compassion flows, and that was my gift from the forgiveness process. So when we harbour these things, as Lord Buddha said, taking resentment is like taking a pill of poison and expecting it to kill your enemy. Every time you choose not to forgive, you harbour that wound inside emotionally. And there is categorical, medically peer-reviewed studies linking anger, the suppression of anger, to the biggest killer in Australian society currently, which is still cardiovascular disease. Now, the ancient Chinese have known this, and the Vedas before them have known about the suppression of anger and the toxicity it causes within our system, mentally, emotionally, and physically, not to mention spiritually. So, and this is why the Buddhists will talk about anger and how it is a destructive emotion. But it's the suppression of anger as opposed to the actual feeling of it. So when we feel it, If we feel it and just feel the emotion completely and then let it flow and don't allow ourselves to get attached to it, it's a message that's going to come to us. And if we get this message, then what happens is we can actually navigate the situation in front of us without taking the emotional burden of the situation upon us. Now, this can happen for someone who's gone through a traumatic time, where there's been a perpetrator inflict traumatic wounds upon them. And if they can bring themselves to this point of forgiveness, they liberate themselves. Now, does it require the other person to receive the forgiveness? The simple answer is no. But what it does do is liberates me, because I can't control another person. I control three things: my thoughts, my words, my deeds. I cannot control whether or not they receive my forgiveness. But not only that, in me believing that my forgiveness will cure all, it's possibly slightly egoic. Or am I simply part of a bigger picture where I need to complete my loop in this reality, and I come to a completion of the cycle within this? For me to say that the being assaulted in the mess had nothing to do with me, I was a victim of collateral damage, is to completely negate the fact that I got an incredible gift from that experience, which means I attracted that into my life. I attracted a roadside bomb into my life. I've attracted being slapped by my wife in my face when I was emotionally inept before going to Iraq, wanting to go out for a beer instead of being where my heart was telling me to be, which was next to my 6-month-old daughter and wife on 2 days before I'm departing. I couldn't bring myself to be there. Why? Because I feared being a dad. I feared being a husband. I knew I was going to war. I didn't know if I was coming home, and I couldn't have these conversations. So I would rather be out having a beer with a mate, an absolutely nugatory conversation, not meaningful at all, than be with the person that I loved and got down and asked to spend the rest of my life with, and actually be there with her helping raise my child. I had to forgive myself for that. It's not about my daughter, who I have an incredible bond with now, or my daughters, or my wife. It was about me forgiving me. And when I woke up 2.5 months into my tour in Iraq, that was my worst day that I ever had. Far outweighs being hit by a roadside bomb, when I realised what I'd done to my relationship. That gutted me. Absolutely gutted me. Who did I need to forgive? Not her for slapping me in the face. That was a wake-up call. I needed to forgive myself for the actions and the emotional turbulence that I'd taken, the emotional suppression that I'd had, the way I'd lived my life up to that stage. All this I needed to forgive myself for, and in forgiving myself, opened the door to some possibility that I could actually heal and take myself to the next level, which I have. Which is why, when I've given that lady in there a lot of reasons to actually walk away from me, after 21 years, she's still here, and I have an incredible relationship with my daughters, which I'm so humbled and honoured for. Why? Because I've chosen the path to forgive myself for that old story, and therefore in this moment create a memory which is creating a new future. What happens if you don't forgive? Is it bad? It's not bad. It is. You don't have to forgive. I'll just call the white elephant, and that is, you will harbour, by not forgiving, you will harbour that on your shoulders, in your heart space. And that does have an effect, and you know that has an effect. And if that's where you're at life, that's cool. That is absolutely okay. Because in life, we'll only ever go as far as we possibly can. But I just throw this little wafer at you. What about if it was possible to forgive? What, if it was possible, what would forgiveness look like if it had nothing to do with the other individual? I'll leave that one with you. Trust it's been worth it. Much love.